He just made all these up, actually. I can't tell you what you just told me.
This is that moment where I check my flying tower.
These are questions from our you people.
You lot.
Hi, Neil. That's not a question.
Hi.
How long had you had the idea for the TARDIS incarnate? It was wonderful.
Thank you. How long did I... So, I've been talking on my blog for ages about how much I was enjoying the new Doctor Who and how much I'd loved the old Doctor Who. And at some point in there, Stephen Moffat and I, who I'd never met, agreed to meet up for dinner because we mutual admiration. And I had heard through a dealer friend of mine, he was actually my dealer, we would do these things that we would arrange to meet in the McDonald's off exit 11. And he would go in first, and he'd sit down at the table, and he'd have like a newspaper or magazine, and I'd sort of hang around, and then he'd get up, and he'd walk past, and not look at me, and I'd go down, and I'd sit there, and I'd lift up the newspaper he'd left on the table, and I would take the DVDs and put them in my pocket. We could have done it less formally, that it was so much fun. And so, I'd heard that maybe Moffat was going to be taking over Doctor Who. And we had this meal where we started talking in hypotheticals. I was thinking, if somebody actually did ask me to write, finally we got to the point where he just looked at me and said, look, fuck it. You know that I'm taking over, I'm going to be showrunning Doctor Who. I know that you want to write an episode. Let's just stop fucking around, okay? All right. He said, just if you come up with an idea, call me. And what was interesting is I hadn't had the idea about making the TARDIS a person. It began all upside down in the way that you start with a germ of an idea. I thought, wouldn't it be nice to make the TARDIS, which is always the safest place in Doctor Who, the most dangerous place? If I'm going to make the TARDIS the most dangerous place, I need a companion being menaced, because it's no fun to have the Doctor being menaced in the TARDIS. That should be a companion. How am I going to do that? Well, obviously, it would be really cool if the TARDIS's sort of soul and intelligence is replaced by something malevolent. Fair enough. What am I going to do with the TARDIS? I've got soul and I've got the Doctor, obviously not in this bit. I'll stick it in somebody. It's always been, they've always referred to the TARDIS as being female. It's always been, old girl and stuff like that from the nautical side of things. So great, it'll be a go. And I phoned Stephen Moffat and I explained the whole plot to him. And as far as I'm concerned, the fact that I'm sticking the TARDIS inside a woman's head is actually it's not the big thing. And I get to the end of my pitch and he says, "Oh, TARDIS girl, I love it." And I thought, that's the plot. So yeah. That was how it began.
That was great. Okay, I'm going to skip that one.
You have that now?
I'm just doing this capriciously. Hi, Neil, again.
You are a very polite audience. I like that.
Smiley face.
There's a smiley face. And thanks, there's a big thanks at the end for answering the question.
Where's Steph? Where's Steph? Hi, Steph.
Hi, Steph. She'll say that.
Yeah, that's gotta be good, right? Okay, Stephen King told you to enjoy it. Stephen King told you to enjoy it. Any recommendations to those who know they should but still can't?
Okay, so let me clarify. So, 1992, Season of Mists had come out, and I was in Boston doing a signing. And it was a long signing. And Stephen King and his family showed up at the signing. Joe, the incredibly young Joe Hill, back when he still looked like a clonal, sort of 19-year-old version of his father. And I'm still not convinced he wasn't grown from, a fragment of Stephen King's planted and watered. Joe came in and gave me a note from his dad, and I'm going, why do I know this handwriting? And I said, I'm Stephen King. He said, come and have dinner. And I said, I can't, but lines around the block. And he said, well, come back to this is our hotel, come and say hello. So, 11 o'clock at night, I get to the hotel, and Steve just says, this is fantastic. This thing that you're doing, the Sandman stuff, I loved Good Omens, the lines around the block. This is great. You should enjoy this. And I didn't. It was the one great piece of advice I was given that I never did. I worried. I worried about the next deadline. I worried about whether the ideas would stop. I worried about whether I was any good. I wondered about whether I'd been any good. I worried about the fraud police. The people who will show up at your door and say, we know. And now you have to go and get a real job. And then I was going to have to go and get a real job because when the fraud police catch up with you, you're doomed. So all of this stuff was just roiling through my head and bubbling. And it really wasn't until about the point that, you're talking 16, 17 years later, I won the Newbery Medal. And for the Graveyard Book, and suddenly went, I think I can enjoy this. I may as well. I don't know what else to do. I will enjoy it. And I sort of breathed a huge sigh of relief and stopped being quite so worried and nervous. And I'm still, I'm still a complete wreck in terms of needing reassurance.
You're doing great, Neil.
Not for you. Actually, I love your little text message saying you'd read it and you liked it. But no, at that point where, when I've written something, I will send it out. I have no idea if it's any good or not, and I'll send it out to friends, and quite sure that if somebody writes back and says, you should probably bury this one, I would probably bury it. So, my advice is don't be like me, Steph. I don't know how. I suggest either win the Newbery Medal really early.
She's got two.
Or just actually, spend time enjoying stuff. Do, get out, play with dogs. Having dogs definitely cheered me up. Having bees. There's nothing like having, a hobby that could kill you. Which I think, all writers should have. So definitely, I recommend dogs, bees. I would recommend cats, but they've never done anything to cheer me up. Cats. Listen, cats are wonderful, but when you're a writer, it's like the difference between cats and dogs when you're writing. When I write with a dog in the room, the dog just looks up at you and goes, I don't know what you're writing, but that's really good. You're so clever. And I like you. And there's nobody in the world as clever as you. Whereas cats actually get up onto the table, they walk past, they look at the screen, and they go, you put a comma there. Also, they secretly email each other at night.
It doesn't go well for the cat in this book.
Oh, it doesn't.
It doesn't go well. I like the cats. One of the first issues of Sandman was the
Dream of a Thousand Cats.
That's good. What was that issue?
Ted, did you want to do the...
Yeah.
There. He's there. We have a natural segue.
Mic on. So Neil, I got an email from Stephen King yesterday. He says, first, congratulations on the book. And his question is, I'd like to know if you think fantasy writers dream more vividly than people who live and work in the straight world. It's a two-part question. He says, do you have a better pipeline to your subconscious thanks to honing your imagination?
Oh, lovely question. First of all, the answer to the first part of the question is I have no idea. Because I haven't got to be somebody who works in the straight world. I've only got to be a fantasy writer. And I haven't got to dream anybody else's dreams or live in anybody else's head. So it's hard for me to go, yes, I dream more vividly. Because I don't know. I might not. I do know that the way that I dream changed when I started writing Sandman. I used to have nightmares. And I used to be a very, very nightmare-y kid. And then a nightmare-y teenager. And then, into my 20s, I would have these nightmares. And I'd wake up, absolutely heart-pounding, terrified. And then, when I was writing Sandman, I'd get one of those heart-pounding, terrified, oh my God, I was in the basement, and I went down and down, and I'm in the basement, and there was the corpse of a baby, and you could see like the autopsy, it had been taken apart and sewn back together again, and then it started coming for me, and it had these little sharp teeth. And I'd be going, oh, that's really good. Scribble it down before I forgot it. And very, very rapidly, the great nightmares went away. They just pretty much stopped. And my eventual theory was whoever was doing them was just going, I don't get it. You throw the weirdest shit at him, he just goes, yes! I was loving my nightmares. But I do think there is definitely something really weird and wonderful that Steve puts his finger on in the second part of that question, which is the pipeline to the subconscious. In his book on writing, which is a fantastic book that I recommend to anyone out there, any of you who want to be writers, read Steve's book on writing. It's filled with really, really good information, but remember that you are allowed to have adverbs if you want.
Only 2 per book.
Steve just says, don't. And it's like, no, you're allowed. I like adverbs. God is in the adverbs. But there is this thing where what he calls the boys in the back room or the boys in the basement. And this was definitely a book that was written with the collaboration of the boys in the basement. You have these you're writing stuff that you know is correct. You don't know how it's going to turn out. You don't actually know what's going to happen next. But you kind of trust the boys in the basement. You trust these people who kind of know what they're doing and live in your head. This weird kind of pipeline to your subconscious. You're driving, you're not, E.L. Doctorow once described the process of writing one of his novels as like driving in the dark with your headlights on. And he said, well, you can't see very far, but you can see as far, you could drive from New York to LA, just with how far ahead you can see. And this book was more like driving through the fog at night with one headlight out. You're going kind of slowly. But what fascinated me was I always knew pretty much what was going to happen tomorrow. What I'd be writing tomorrow. At the end of the day, I knew where that was. And when I didn't, I would wake up the next day and the boys in the basement would have been shifting stuff around. And I go, oh yes, I know what I'm writing. And I'd read it and I would just write the next page and keep going. So I do think just because we have to do this day after day, the making stuff up thing, and the trusting that we're doing the right thing, we do have a thing. But I don't think it's exclusive to writers of fantasy or horror or science fiction. I love Dickens. And one reason I love Dickens is because I wrote Sandman. And it was serial fiction. And it was a long-form serial fiction. So I go and I look at something like Bleak House, and I start going, okay, this is the stuff where he knows what's happening. This is the stuff where he has no idea what's happening, but he thinks it may come in useful. This is something that he's actually just done because he needs something to fill between that page and that page. But actually, he is going to find later on that that's incredibly useful, because at the point where he goes, you know, I just need, for this plot to work, I just need a character who's that size and that shape, and I've got one of those. I've got one of those already. You know, and that fascinates me. In Sandman, I'm just writing a scene currently where I did the rough draft, and I went, you know, it's such a pity because I need a character who is this shape. I wrote this character. And then suddenly, once I'd done the rough draft, I was going, you know, actually, I have that character already. She was in Sandman #3. I can bring her back. She can be that thing. And people are going to go, boy, he's clever. And I have no idea if I'm clever or not. It may well be just the boys in the basement doing their job.
The cat says not.
The cats always say not.
There's two things that spring to mind. First of all, how big is Stephen King's basement? Because that's scary. John Irving, I wonder what you think of this. John Irving said that he never starts a book until he writes the last line, which is sort of taking what you're talking about to the next sort of nth level. So he wrote In the World According to Garp, we are all his terminal cases before he started, or else he said he would just be meandering in the desert. Does that resonate with you at all, or is that just too far?
No, it really doesn't resonate in any way, shape, or form. I don't want to know what the last line is before I start. I don't really want to know how it ends. I would like, for me, it's always the process of discovery. It's magical. One of the places that I suppose is a nice example of the thing that I'm talking about is in the Graveyard Book. In chapter 1 of the Graveyard Book, I wrote a nursery rhyme. I made up this, you know, sleep my little babio, sleep until you waken. And it ends. She doesn't finish it. She can't remember how it finishes, and so it doesn't finish. And all I knew was that it would come back in the end, and I would find out how it ended. And I didn't think about it for a moment, and I hadn't thought about what the rhymes were, and I hadn't thought about anything and how it was going to, you know, match into the themes of the book. And then I'm writing the very last chapter, and in the very last scene of the very last chapter, there is Mrs. Owens, and she sings the final thing. And the final thing is just this leave no path untaken. And I thought, that's it. And I just felt like the first reader. Wow. I didn't feel like the clever writer. I just felt, oh, that's what she says. How fantastic. And then finished the book and found out how it ended. Yeah. And you have to have, for me, if you don't have the process of discovery, you don't have anything. Except, of course, in the current Sandman project. Because I know exactly what's on how that ends. Because that, of course, ends with the splash page of Sandman 1.
Ooh.
So that will be at the end of episode 6. Nobody's going to buy it.
Yeah. I just skipped that completely. You know, there are some people that are storytellers. Tonight we have with us someone who is a story, a never-ending story. Ladies and gentlemen, Neil King.